What's going on, everybody? So just over an hour ago, it was announced the XFL is suspending operations and will not return for the 2021 season. Now, the XFL, if you don't know, is a professional football league that started up this spring. It was its first season. Now, the XFL did run in 2001, but this was a revamped new version of the XFL, still owned by Vince McMahon, the same man who is the CEO for WWE and basically runs all their stuff. But the XFL was really planned, put together well. They had Commissioner Oliver Luck, who was a very good visionary, very good manager for the league. And it was planned out very well. It was a process that wasn't put together very quickly. Something like the Alliance Football League, which was, well, not the Alliance Football League, what was the official name? The Alliance of American Football, the AAF, which ran last year in the spring, folded after a couple of weeks because they ran out of money and actually strand players sometimes in different markets without being able to pay for their flights to return the players back to their homes. So that was a very slapped together kind of league that didn't run well at all. When it lacked publicity, it lacked fans, it had a lot of issues. The XFL was not that way in the fact that it had fans, it had publicity. Its games were nationally televised every week, so it had the viewership, and they put a pretty good number of fans in the stadiums. They didn't fill up NFL level stadiums, but they had a good number of fans, and they really developed good local followings in places, especially like Seattle. So they had a good framework, and they had people like Oliver Luck who were running the shows, not Vince McMahon, who's basically screwed up the 2001 version of the XFL by trying to make it all about showmanship and that kind of stuff, which just wasn't going to bring in fans. It wasn't real football. This XFL was real football and actually implemented rules, like the kickoff rule, that you might see in the NFL someday. So it actually tested out rules that will probably go into the NFL. And you saw some players who were in the XFL sign contracts with NFL teams because they were that good. So you had real football players playing real football with good rules that were even an improvement on some of the rules the NFL has. And you got nationally televised games. You had financial backing from McMahon. Let's face it, even this year they had lost money, which I'm pretty sure they probably came close to losing some money. McMahon still would have been able to hold them up for another year. Like, he had the money to do so. But the XFL is ceasing operations. They're not folding, but they're not running operations anymore. They basically fired most of their important pieces, most of the important staff Friday morning, so this morning. And they have announced they're not coming back for next season. Now, initially, when the league postponed play or shut down the current season because of the COVID-19 pandemic, they were planning to return next season. Everyone thought they were going to return next season. Even the staffers believed they were going to return in 2021 and around the second year. And really, I mean, the fans did too, because they had the financial backing, they had moderate success, and they had fans they brought fans into stadiums. They had people who were watching football and watching their games, and their games were legitimate games. Although I don't think they were on the level of high caliber colleges like someone like an Alabama or Clemson or LSU. I don't think they were that good, and obviously they weren't as good as NFL teams. But during the spring, when there's no organized professional football on the level of college football or the NFL, the XFL did fairly well. And it built a very good fan base in certain locations, maybe not so much everywhere, but certain teams did have very good fan bases. And you had people who were legitimate coaches or had legitimate coaching backgrounds. So it wasn't like we're just throwing people out there. You had qualified individuals in leadership positions. And you saw qualified players like Cam Phillips, the wide receiver, who did very well. They had Jordan Tayamu. I can't say his last name, I'm sorry, but he did very well. You saw, and he was a quarterback. You saw multiple guys. Cordell Jones had a couple of games, not consistently, but he had several good games. And you just think about it, they had the pieces to a potentially very good league, something that can maybe expand in the future. PJ Walker, of course, the quarterback, was phenomenal, probably the best player, or at least the most recognizable player within the league. And you had guys, former NFL players like Cameron Artis-Payne at running back, Matt Jones, another running back, was a former NFL player, Josh Johnson, quarterback. So you had guys who had been in the NFL. They came to the XFL to play again or a shot. Some of those guys got back into the NFL. A couple of them did. So why is the XFL suspending operations and not coming back for 2021? I think the big issue for them is, well, they lost money, obviously, during this pandemic. They had to shut down because of the pandemic. And there's going to be some questions about, well, were they a casualty of having to shut down their operations, basically miss out on their what would have been their playoffs or championships in the last couple of weeks of the season, and you still have to pay people through the end of the year. So was it the cause? Was it because of the pandemic? I don't think it was. I mean, maybe that contributed to it, but we're talking about Vince McMahon, who's the CEO of WWE. This man has so much money. I mean, to even be able to own a league, to be able to own a professional football league to begin with, tells you the kind of cash he's working with. I don't believe he absolutely had to financially close. He didn't have to close it down because of financial issues. That's not the thing. I just don't think it would be sensible to say it's a financial issues because of the amount of money he has. It doesn't make sense that you would drop this so quickly because he said he expected to lose some money when initially starting this all up and then recover over time. And that's insinuating that you would have the money to potentially get in the negative for a couple of years, then recover, which I think he does. So this is surprising. I think even the staffers, like even the high-level staffers at the XFL, expected to come back next year when the XFL suspended the season because of COVID-19. So this is surprising. It's a little disappointing because the XFL put on a good product to say. Like, it wasn't phenomenal. The offensive line play was really bad all around. I think the offensive line really did limit a lot of the offenses as well, especially the running game. But overall, it was a fairly good product. I mean, I watch games. I watch the games not as much as I would have watched like the NFL. I didn't watch it that religiously, but I watched the games, and you had guys who were qualified professional level players. The biggest issue, I think, with the XFL during its actual seasons was the venues. Sometimes the venues were very big and you didn't fill up all the stands, so I don't know how financially that was working for them. But they had people who were willing to buy into this idea. And you see fan bases like Seattle. Seattle's always got a great fan base for their sports teams. Seattle really got behind their team. And it was a scenario where you had legitimate fan bases developing in multiple locations. And this is a situation where you pulled the plug on something too quickly. I don't know. Maybe it is financial. So maybe McMahon really did have financial issues and he needed to pull the plug on this. But just it doesn't feel like that's the situation based on how everything was going up to this point. And I'm really surprised they're not coming back for another year, especially because they had probably the most success of any other professional league within recent history because they had the financial back. They had visionaries in the front office, someone like Oliver Lux and people who were looking over this thing and planning for the future. They had nationally televised games. So they had their games out there to millions of people, which is a situation that the AAF, the Alliance of American Football, didn't have last year. They didn't have all their games being broadcast. They didn't have people in the stands as much. And they didn't have the financial ability to take risks, and the XFL did, which is probably why it succeeded for the time it did. And like I said, it was planned out. The rules of the XFL were so well planned out. Yeah, I didn't like every rule, but I thought they did a really good job of putting them into place and then implementing them. I also thought some of the personalities you brought on board, some of the guys who had calling games, and Greg Olson was involved. I know Pat McAfee was involved. So you brought in professional guys who are really good at calling games, really entertaining, and you let them do their thing. And that only added, to my opinion, to what you had on the field. And there were certain aspects of the XFL that I liked. I think the kickoffs were phenomenal. It brought kickoffs back into the game of football, which is something you don't have at the NFL level right now. So I think the XFL did contribute a lot. It's a shame it's not coming back, but it's not too. It's surprising because I expect it to be back for at least next year. It's not surprising that it ultimately folds. But I think this is the latest example of professional football leagues not being able to survive in America outside of the NFL. Because you have the NFL, you have college football. College football maybe is a more around-the-clock thing. The NFL also has the draft. And you talk about college football with like their spring games and stuff like that. So these are around-the-clock really leagues, even if they're not playing for the entire year. but they're generating news and issues year round, so you can go and check those out. So those are the two dominant football forces in America. And you look at the Alliance, you look at the XFL, even arena football, which I think filed for bankruptcy back in the fall. I mean, those are the arena football league is one that has been around for a long time, been around for over 30 years, I think. So it's been a league that is established. That's folding. And you've got upstarts like the Alliance and the XFL that can't even get through a full season because people forget the AAF did not even reach their championship game. And the XFL, because of COVID-19, had to suspend their season before they reached the finals. So you have back-to-back years where upstart professional football leagues have shut down before they even gotten through a full season. And I said in the fall, the Arena Football League filing for bankruptcy. So now we're at a point where I think if you're planning on putting a new product on the field or planning on trying to start a new league, you have to realize that you can have the money, you can have a very planned system, you can have nationally televised games, and you can still fail. And you can have quality players too, and you can still fail. So at this point, I mean, I think we've probably got this out of our systems. I think we need to realize that this is probably the last attempt, or should be the last attempt, maybe for the next 7 to 10 years, of a new professional football league trying to start up, because it's not working. It just isn't working. It's not financially viable. And even in the best case scenario, like we have with the XFL, even when everything looks like it's going right, something can go wrong with this pandemic and throw it off course. So really, this should be the last attempt to start a new professional football league for the long term, probably even, but for the short term at least, because right now those leagues are not viable. And as many great opportunities as they give to people, not just football players, but also coaches, people who run social media for the teams and stuff like that. They're great chances, great internships, great stuff like that. But really, if you're the people who are financially supporting these leagues, you have to realize you're probably not going to get your money back. And the only way to keep your money would probably be to close the league in the short term, not run something that's going to go for 5 or 6 to 10 years of operations. I mean, the XFL, like I said, the XFL planned perfectly with financial backing, big name guys who are visionaries in the front office, and it folds. Well, not folds. It shuts down operations after less than one season. So I think moving forward, we can expect to not see as many upstart leagues trying to move in and take on in games in the spring, because I just don't think that's a viable way to play football right now. I think moving forward, we will see people kick the idea around, but I think we'll have to understand that we've already seen the Lions try it and that didn't work out well. Now we've seen the XFL try a year later, and that also hasn't worked out. So I think we can expect this is the end of the upstart football leagues, at least for the short term.